Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. Dive into the ultimate cosmic rivalry, God versus the devil.
Oh, yeah, the big one.
Right. In this deep dive, we are tracking the historical origins of Satan, like how he morphed from a mere prosecuting attorney in an ancient heavenly court into the ultimate ruler of demons.
He is quite the promotion.
Yeah.
Or demotion, really.
Exactly. And then we step into the ultimate theological showdown in the wilderness between the devil and Jesus. We're breaking down how centuries of ancient history and John Milton's epic poetry shape our profound understandings of temptation, divine power, and the deeply human struggle against pride.
It really is a massive multi-millennium journey. I mean, we're looking at thousands of years of human history, theology, and sheer literary genius just colliding in one narrative.
And to tackle a topic this massive, we are pulling from two incredibly detailed sources today.
Yeah, two really heavy hitters.
Right. First, we have a comprehensive historical breakdown mapping out how the very concept of Satan actually evolved over centuries. And second, we have a deep literary analysis of John Milton's Paradise Regained.
Which is such a brilliant text.
It really is. It takes that historically evolved concept of the devil and pits him in a ruthless psychological chess match against Jesus. So our mission today is to connect these two pieces.
We want to show you how a historical evolution basically set the stage for one of the greatest philosophical showdowns ever written.
Exactly. But hey, before we unpack this epic clash, a quick reminder for you. If you like my channel, please subscribe and press the like button.
It really helps out. And honestly, it's the perfect pairing of sources today. You really can't fully appreciate the magnitude of that wilderness debate without understanding the heavy historical baggage the character of Satan brings to the table.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to understand this epic theological battle, you first have to understand who, or rather what, Satan originally was.
Right.
Because if you look at the earliest texts our sources highlight, he wasn't always a red guy with a pitchfork and a bifurcated tail ruling over an underworld, you know?
No, not at all. That image came way, way later.
In the early Hebrew Bible, the Satan is less of an evil mastermind and more like, I don't know, a heavenly corporate auditor. Or a prosecuting attorney, right?
What's fascinating here is that the word Satan in ancient Hebrew wasn't even a proper name.
Wait, really?
Yeah, it was just a noun. It translated roughly to adversary or accuser. If you look at the earliest sections of the Hebrew Bible, the word is just used to describe regular human adversaries in mundane conflicts.
Oh, wow. So just like a guy you're arguing with over land or something.
Exactly. But as the texts evolve, it becomes a divine job title. Like, look at the book of Job.
Right, the famous story of Job.
The text presents a scene where God is presiding over a divine council, essentially a heavenly boardroom or courtroom, and the Satan is present. But he's not a rebel.
He's just an employee.
Yeah, he's literally on the payroll. His job is to test humanity, to act as the legal adversary trying to find Job guilty of weak faith.
Wait, pause. I need to stop you there because that creates a massive theological headache, doesn't it?
Oh, a huge one.
If the ultimate symbol of cosmic evil started out as a middle management auditor working for God, isn't God ultimately responsible for the evil he does? I mean, the text literally has him asking permission to ruin Job's life.
Yeah, that is exactly the theological friction that ancient scholars wrestled with. And our historical source points out that this friction is precisely what drove the character's evolution.
Okay, how so?
Well, in those early texts, including the book of Zechariah, where he acts as a divine prosecutor, accusing the high priest, the ancient Israelites viewed God as the source of everything, both the good and the calamity.
Right. There was no competing evil God.
Exactly. But over time, that became psychologically and theologically difficult to maintain. Like, how could a perfectly good God intentionally cause immense suffering?
Right, you need a scapegoat. You need someone else to take the blame for the terrible things happening in the world.
You do.
So how do we get from a heavenly lawyer to the cosmic archenemy of God?
To understand that, our source applies what historians call the 5 C's of historical thinking, which instead of just looking at dates, historians look at change over time, context, causality, complexity, and contingency. Let's focus heavily on causality and context here.
Okay.
The Judeans didn't just wake up one day and invent a cosmic demon out of nowhere. They were conquered. In 586 BCE, the Babylonian Empire sacked Jerusalem, destroyed the temple, and took the Judean elite into exile.
Oh. So this was a massive collective cultural trauma.
Huge.
So they're sitting in exile, their home is completely destroyed, and they were trying to figure out why their God allowed this to happen.
Exactly. And then The political landscape shifts again. The Persian Empire defeats the Babylonians.
Out of the frying pan, into the fire.
Right. This meant the exiled Judeans were suddenly living under Persian control, and they were exposed to a completely new, dominant religious worldview, Zoroastrianism.
Oh, wow. And Zoroastrianism has a very different framework for understanding good and evil, doesn't it? It's highly dualistic.
It is entirely dualistic. Zoroastrianism teaches that history is a constant, brutal cosmic battle between a perfectly good divine being, Ahura Mazda, and a wholly evil, independent being, Angra Mainyu.
So good and evil are essentially on equal footing fighting it out.
Yes. And when the Judean elites interacted with this Persian culture over centuries, a profound, complex cultural exchange happened.
That makes sense.
The Judeans needed a way to explain their own suffering without blaming their god, and they were living in a society where everything was framed as an epic battle between a god of light and a god of darkness.
So they just copied the Persian homework. They took Angra Mainyu and slapped the name Satan on him.
Well, it's more of a synthesis than a direct copy. It's historical contingency ideas blending together under specific pressures. We start seeing Judean apocalyptic texts theorizing about a massive cosmic struggle that mirrors that Persian dualism.
Okay, give me an example.
If you look at the Dead Sea Scrolls, suddenly there's a two-spirits theology, spirits of light and spirits of darkness.
So the prosecuting attorney gets a massive promotion or demotion, depending on how you look at it.
Precisely. The Dead Sea Scrolls mention a thoroughly evil angel named Belial leading an army of other dark spirits.
Belial, right.
Then you have other apocalyptic texts like First Enoch, which talks about angels literally falling from heaven as stars, figures named Shemihasa or Asael who corrupt humanity.
This is starting to sound a lot more familiar.
Right. Over time, according to the historical analysis, these separate threads merge. The divine tester from Job, the Zoroastrian cosmic enemy, and the rebellious fallen angels from Enoch all blend into a single narrative.
So the prosecutor morphs into the independent cosmic rebel we recognize today.
Exactly.
That is wild to think about. I mean, think about how this applies to you listening right now, the religious concepts you might take for granted, the images you have in your head of ultimate good and ultimate evil. They aren't just static ideas that dropped out of the sky.
No, they're heavily layered.
They are complex historical mosaics. They were shaped by changing empires, political conquests, trauma, and cultural blending centuries ago.
And that historical evolution is precisely what sets the stage for the New Testament and eventually for John Milton's Paradise Regained.
Right, because now the character's fully formed.
Because history transforms Satan from a subordinate lawyer into this ultimate cosmic rebel. By the time we reach the life of Jesus, this figure is perfectly positioned for a direct theological and intellectual clash.
Right, because now Satan isn't just a lawyer asking permission. He is an existential threat with his own agency.
Yeah, he's the boss of his own dark kingdom.
But here's the storytelling problem. Once you make your villain that powerful, how does your hero realistically beat him?
It's a tricky balance.
If God just flicks him away, there's no narrative weight. And that exact problem is what John Milton was trying to solve in Paradise Regained. In his previous epic, Paradise Lost, Satan successfully tempted Adam and Eve, causing the fall of humanity.
Right, he got a huge win early on.
Now Milton asks, what happens when the ultimate deceiver goes toe-to-toe with God incarnate?
But to make this work, Milton had to navigate a really tricky theological setup regarding the nature of Jesus.
Oh, the dual nature stuff.
Yeah, the dual nature of Christ, being fully God and fully man simultaneously, was a massive debate in Milton's time, and it fundamentally changes how you read the stakes of the story.
Because if Jesus was just fully God, walking the earth with an invisible shield of omnipotence, this wilderness test is basically a fake trial.
Totally.
He'd be playing a video game with the cheat codes turned on. If he can see the future and control all of reality without any effort, then refusing the devil's offers means absolutely nothing.
He wouldn't even feel the temptation.
Exactly. For the test to mean anything, he had to be playing on survival mode, feeling real hunger and real pain.
That is a perfect analogy. Milton's view, which our literary source breaks down beautifully, is that Jesus had the perfect mind and divine wisdom, but that perfection was strictly limited to the human form.
So he felt everything we feel.
He was fully human in his physical and emotional experience. He wasn't a divine tourist just pretending to suffer. He actually suffered.
That's a great way to put it, a divine tourist.
Yeah, he felt the elements. He fasted for 40 days in the harsh wilderness and felt agonizing, real starvation. If he didn't experience genuine human want and vulnerability, His triumph over temptation would be hollow.
And the inciting incident that kicks off this whole showdown is incredibly cinematic.
It really is.
Jesus is baptized by John the Baptist in the Jordan River. He comes up out of the water, the Holy Spirit descends like a dove, and a voice from heaven says, "This is my beloved son."
And Milton writes that Satan is watching this happen.
And he absolutely panics.
He panics because Satan remembers the ancient prophecy from the Garden of Eden that one day a seed of the woman would come to bruise the serpent's head.
The ultimate foreshadowing.
Right. He realizes this seemingly ordinary carpenter from Nazareth might actually be the prophesied hero destined to destroy his dark kingdom. So Satan immediately gathers his demonic forces in the air.
I love that image. This invisible, desperate war room in the sky above humanity.
It's a great visual. And the demons know they can't fight Jesus in a direct physical war.
No, they already tried that.
Right. They tried an angelic rebellion in heaven eons ago and lost spectacularly. Satan reasons that the only way to defeat Jesus is to use the exact same psychological trap that worked on Adam and Eve.
Pride.
Exactly. Pride. If you can get Jesus to elevate himself, to prioritize his own ego, his own comfort, and his own power over his divine mission, Satan wins.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Because the stakes are established and the battle in the wilderness begins. But it's not a physical fight with swords and lightning bolts. It's a profound, intense intellectual debate.
It's a battle of ideas.
And as our source outlines, it's really a debate between divinity and a sort of ultimate atheistic pride. Satan represents a worldview of total self-worship and materialism.
It's a clash of two completely incompatible frameworks of reality.
And Satan is so desperate right out of the gate. First, he disguises himself as a helpless old man gathering firewood. Such a classic trick.
He walks up to a starving Jesus and essentially says, "Hey, if you're really the Son of God, prove it. Turn these useless rocks into bread. Save yourself."
And Jesus counters intellectually. He doesn't just say no, he quotes scripture. Man does not live by bread alone.
Right.
He completely refuses to use divine power for his own personal comfort. He embraces the physical suffering because it connects him to the human condition, referencing human prophets like Moses and Elijah who also suffered in the wilderness.
He proves his spirit is stronger than his biology.
Precisely.
So Satan drops the old man disguise and goes bigger. He literally snaps his fingers and conjures a lavish, impossible buffet right in the middle of the desert.
The banquet scene.
We're talking Arthurian knights, beautiful servers, the most incredible food imaginable. And Jesus just looks at it and rejects it again. So Satan has to pivot. He realizes Jesus isn't driven by bodily appetites. He decides to appeal to his ambition. This is a crucial pivot in Milton's narrative. Satan realizes he is dealing with a being of immense intellect and discipline, so he offers what he assumes any great being would naturally want.
Glory.
Glory and influence. He says, "You are meant to be a great king. How can you enact your goodness without power? You need wealth, armies, and empires to actually change the world."
But doesn't that just make Satan look a little, clueless?
How so?
Well, he is acting like a slick, desperate salesman pitching worldly fame to the being who supposedly created the universe. It's like offering the CEO of a global tech empire a stolen flip phone.
That's a hilarious comparison, but yeah.
It's so fundamentally mismatched. He takes Jesus to a high mountain and shows him Rome, Greece, Parthia, the greatest military and intellectual powers on earth. He tells Jesus to conquer them, to take the throne of David right now by force, rather than waiting for God's timing.
It is a mismatch, but it reveals Satan's fundamental blindness. Jesus completely rejects the vanity of glory for glory's sake.
He's just not interested.
He argues that it is far nobler to be a king of one's own spirit in poverty than to rule empires through bloodshed and coercion. He tells Satan that conquering nations doesn't bring true peace, it just breeds more violence.
Jesus even references Socrates in this debate.
He does.
He points out that Socrates was poor, suffering, and politically powerless, yet he was a king of his own mind and left a lasting legacy of truth. It's fascinating because this whole exchange highlights how Satan is missing the point of existence entirely.
Completely missing it.
Satan views power only through the lens of military conquest, manipulation, and ego. Our literary source suggests Satan represents a completely materialistic, almost atheistic view of reality where might makes right, and the highest possible good is just elevating yourself above others.
That is the absolute core of Satan's tragedy in this epic. He cannot fathom a reality based on anything other than transactional power.
Right. If you have power, you use it to dominate. That's his whole mindset.
He fails to comprehend a God who seeks pure love without demanding forced submission. During the debate, Satan argues, Your Father demands glory, so why shouldn't you demand it too?
And what does Jesus say?
Jesus replies that God doesn't demand glory out of insecurity or vanity. God is the source of all existence, of all goodness. Returning thanks and glory to the Creator is just the natural, logical order of participating in that love.
Wow.
Satan's rebellion, his ultimate sin of pride, was a rejection of that reality in favor of his own ego.
So what does this all mean? We see the devil drop the slick salesman act and completely break down. The bribes of wealth fail, the promises of empire fail, and Satan's true existential motive is finally revealed.
It comes to the surface.
It's not just about winning a cosmic chess match to secure territory. It is a deep, tragic jealousy rooted in his own lost connection to the divine.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this interaction highlights the ultimate philosophical choice, surrendering to a higher moral purpose versus giving in to absolute destructive pride. When all his rhetorical darts are spent, Satan realizes he cannot outsmart Jesus. He flies into a furious, panicked monologue.
He literally screams at Jesus. He demands to know why Jesus is called beloved. He says he's watched Jesus his whole life, stalking him since childhood, trying to figure out what makes him so special.
Such a creepy, obsessive detail, Milton added.
And then he drops this incredibly poignant, heartbreaking line. He looks at Jesus and says, "The Son of God I also am, or was."
Or was. It is a devastating piece of writing. In that moment, the entire historical evolution we talked about in the first half of our discussion, the heavenly accuser, the Zoroastrian enemy of light, the fallen star from Enoch, it all crystallizes into this deeply pathetic, wounded creature.
And just broken?
He remembers what he lost. He remembers being a being of light in the divine presence. His current pride, his whole ruler of hell persona, is just a fragile shell covering a massive existential void.
That's deep.
He hates Jesus because Jesus perfectly embodies the humility, the peace, and the connection to God that Satan threw away for the sake of his own ego.
So, out of pure spite and desperation, he decides to force the issue. This is the climax of the epic.
The pinnacle.
Exactly. Satan physically takes Jesus, carrying him through the air, and flies him to the pinnacle of the grand temple in Jerusalem. He balances Jesus on the highest, most precarious spire of the temple and essentially says, "Okay, if you are really the Son of God, prove it once and for all. Jump."
Use the cheat codes.
Right. The scriptures say the angels will catch you so you won't strike your foot against a stone.
It's a brilliant, highly manipulative final move. It's a psychological trap more than a physical one. It's a plea for Jesus to finally show off his power, to act exactly as Lucifer would act.
Because Lucifer would totally jump to show off.
100%. Satan wants Jesus to perform a miracle purely for vanity, to demand God's intervention as a magic trick to save his own life. If Jesus jumps to prove a point, he succumbs to pride. If he falls and dies, Satan wins.
And how does Jesus defeat him? This is the best part. He doesn't summon a heavenly army. He doesn't shoot lightning bolts out of his hands.
No pyrotechnic.
He simply stands his ground, bounces on the spire, and quietly says, "Tempt not the Lord thy God."
That silence, that absolute restraint, destroys Satan. Because in that single moment, the devil realizes Jesus possesses a humility and an inner strength he can never, ever understand, let alone conquer.
The ultimate weapon against the ultimate evil wasn't more power, more force, or a louder argument. It was perfect obedience and selflessness.
Satan loses his balance, terrified by this profound revelation of divinity, and falls from the temple, completely bested. Meanwhile, angels finally come down to minister to Jesus, signaling that the paradise lost by Adam's pride has been officially regained by Christ's humility.
It's an unbelievable narrative arc connecting raw history to high literature. So to recap the massive journey of this deep dive, we started by tracing the concept of Satan from an ancient, localized, divine prosecutor, literally just a guy doing an audit in a heavenly court.
Right.
We unpacked the mechanics of how he evolved through a history of changing empires, cultural trauma, and Zoroastrian influence, watching him morph into a cosmic rebel to help explain human suffering.
A huge transformation.
And we rode that history all the way to his psychological destruction at the hands of a fully human, fully divine Jesus in Milton's epic poetry, where the battle wasn't fought with swords, but with worldviews.
And this brings it all back to you, the listener. Think about how this applies today. Whether you view these texts as literal theology, a philosophical exploration of belief versus materialism, or purely as literary genius, they challenge you to examine your own life.
Oh, absolutely.
When Satan offers Jesus the empires of the world, he's basically offering the ultimate shortcut to success. If you're listening to this and you've ever compromised your values just to get a promotion, to win an argument, or to gain a little status, you understand the exact psychology Milton is playing with here.
It's a universal struggle.
These texts force you to look at your relationship with power, with pride, and with temptation. Are you chasing the empty calories of worldly validation like the empires Satan offered? Or are you trying to be a king of your own spirit, grounded in a deeper truth?
Consider this: if the historical concept of the ultimate evil evolved strictly because ancient empires collided, shared ideas, and tried to make sense of their trauma, morphing a boardroom auditor into a cosmic rebel, what modern cultural or technological forces are quietly reshaping our definitions of ultimate good and ultimate evil right now without us even noticing? Think about that until next time.